Yeah, I'd like to follow on what Les was saying, because actually that was going to be my question. How do you handle if there's a huge interest in the research that you do, particularly when you are working with local residents and you are involved in all the way through the research, the analysis and authorship? And if you have this mindset of all voices count and we need to get as many voices out there as possible. So what if the interest is so big that you mentioned time and it's really difficult to decide when is it time to stop? So what about scope? How do you say no to someone because you've already got so many participants? How do you then say to someone, I'm sorry, I can't involve you? How do you deal with that?
I think it sounds very basic and very crude really, but I think the only way perhaps one way to deal with that is just to be honest about the limitations of what you can do. And it doesn't necessarily say no. It's saying, look, I can't take on another commitment. I think it's really important. I think what you've got to say is really important. But I have limits on what I can do. I've never had anybody say, God, but I think if you're honest about what you can do and what you can't do, I think people recognise it. They recognise it when they hear it.
Can I just jump in and say, I'm thinking of the practice of Musicians Without Borders and Doctors Without Borders who go from one project to the next in teams and have to kind of pull out because the money's dried up and they suffer all sorts of issues in terms of just lack of funding and lack of value. And we have written about some of that practice. But what they've started to do, they run training schools now, and they work very hard to develop sustainable practices. But when they leave, they're not leaving. They're actually withdrawing from a setting where they've left a practice that is that's going on. And I think as PhD students, it is one person. You're not working in a team and collaboratively over 3 years. It's just you and your supervisor and who else is local as well. That is the traditional model, yeah. But it doesn't actually deny that you could develop a team that works with you. I've got a PhD student who developed a slam poetry program and ran it in a Macedonian prison with young offenders. And in order for this to happen, working in collaboration with the criminology faculty, we developed a kind of frame where she was working in a team that she developed and they all went together and that was also part of the research, was developing the team, developing the practice, developing the program and then working with also leaving leaving parts of the practice there. Because it's to pull out is equal, it wasn't called intercultural research, but it was certainly had the ethical elements that we're talking about here. So I think you've got to be, in short, much more imaginative and creative with the design of the research so that you are thinking about the sustainability of it and that you're producing research as practice that is left in situ. And you can do that with a team that is, that perhaps is already existing in this space, and you're coming in with these trialing and developing new practices in sort of micro way, in ways where you're working with one or two cases rather than multiple, but you're working with deep research, deeply engaging, theorising about that practice and negotiating, and that takes time and it's messy as well. Be creative.
Okay, one more question. That sort of leads on from what you were just saying, a bit my question in that you've talked a lot about, all of you, about reflexivity, positionality, so really scrutinising ourselves as researchers and understanding that culture isn't sort of fixed and essential. I'm just wondering if you have any ideas about how to communicate those ideas to people, to a wider audience who maybe do see themselves as being in a sort of closed culture, who hold on to those traditional ideas of what culture is, what nationhood is, what identity is, to try and, I sort of see it in a way as a luxury, that sort of the time and space to be reflective, a luxury that we have that a lot of people don't have. So I guess it's sort of how to get that idea to a wider audience.
Short answer, if you think about institutional cultures, if you just think about an institution, it can be described just exactly like what you just said, fixed, firm, got an organisational learning structure that is gendered, hierarchical, hegemonic, you use all those words. You go in as a researcher doing a piece of ethno-methodology or working with design-based research practices in order to create some sort of change strategy. How you're thinking about the design of the research. So again, it's multi-layered and textured and woven over time, working with developing a community of practice with people a small team who are kind of working with you and developing it over time. It's about being very strategic. It's about developing ways of engaging with the people who are doing the work on the ground and taking time over that. So think of an organisation or an institution. How would you approach that as opposed to a community in another country? Read around cultural change in institutions and see what methods have been successful and develop ones from there. One solution. Your views? Because I'm thinking the issue that you've got that's the problem is that there's one of you. You are the research, if you were doing an EdD, a professional doctorate, that is over, a part-time, you're working full-time, you're doing something over 5 years, and the research is about the practice in the workplace, then your institution has already signed up to engage with some sort of mechanisms for change, and there'll be, so you're working in situ in the practice itself. But if you're going to somewhere which is out into some space that you've got to become the insider or develop a different relationship over time, trust, build all the things that we've been speaking about, then that in itself can be the research, that actual space of developing relations with people and just keep the scope of it doable rather than thinking it's this sort of life work. It's not. It's one tiny, tiny piece. And so the scope has to be plausible, doable in your lifetime and not to see you, crack under this pressure and put your supervisor into a space of just impossibility because they can't support your vision, and you've got this vision, you've got to listen to advice and bring it right down and make a difference in a very small way. PhD, small steps.
And I suppose some of that is about impact, isn't it? And what comes after the research, that you as a researcher, as a PhD student, have a task. It's finite, it's closed, it's small really. But as you said, it's huge when you get out there. But I think this is the intercultural part about it, isn't it? That you start to engage with the people in the place. And that's, in a way, the way in which you share the knowledge. And also through the creative arts. If I'm thinking about Alison Phipps' play that she established, and she brought those performers to Glasgow, and they lived in tents for 5 days, and they performed their play in that, I've forgotten the name of the space, but it was just outside Glasgow. So this is a way, this was part of a larger project, but in a sense, it might be the impact of your research that comes later. You can't do everything. I think that's the problem with the PhD study in a way, that it is it's about the research, and then what comes out of that is something extra, which can be unmanageable and difficult and can make you feel guilty and all those kinds of things. And that is a challenge. But I guess you do have those confines that you have to work within.
And be honest about it. I think that people tend to accept that.
I think
to stop here. There are lots of questions and thoughts, but that's going to be something we'll be exploring in the session.